Hello, today is with us Foekje Boersma. Foekje Boersma is the head of the Collection Preservation Department in the Royal Library of the Netherlands. She specializes in sustainable collection management, that is taking care of the printed collections while keeping a careful eye on energy and resources. Today, she's going to give a presentation on issues around these topics. Foekje.
Hi, thank you, Marion. I'm going to share my presentation with you, so give me a moment that I can share my screen. And you tell me if you can see my presentation. Does that work?
I haven't seen it yet.
Oh, okay. Apologies. Share.
Yes, there it is.
Now it's working. All right. Thank you for inviting me to talk about the plans of the KB National Library of the Netherlands. And we have big plans, so I'm very happy to share our ideas with you. The KB National Library of the Netherlands is looking towards a more sustainable care of collection for its entire collection of physical books and manuscripts. So what is our challenge? And I'm going to talk about that a little bit. I'm also going to talk about what our solution is, how we came to deciding upon the road we embarked upon. And very briefly, I'm going to talk about a climate simulation study. So who are we and where are we? The National Library of the Netherlands is located in the center of The Hague. We have a large building. We occupy a large building that was built in 1982. It consists of office spaces, reading rooms, and the entire storage of the collection, most of it underground. And because National Library collections are always growing, we had to extend. And in 2007, we built additional storage right next to and into the old building. So the two are connected. Our collections are kind of typical for a national library. Because we are the Netherlands, it's not as big as the one of the, for example, British Library, but it's still substantial. We have about 125 linear kilometers of collection consisting of books, periodicals, newspapers, and of course, special collections. What is the challenge? I guess the challenge of the National Library of the Netherlands is no different to other national libraries. Our collections are still growing. And on this specific location in the heart of the city center, there is no space for expanding the building to occupy more collections. So in the foreseeable future, we just do not have any more space. Another aspect is that the building we're in dates back to 1982 and was built according to insights of the time. And even though at the time it was built as a state-of-the-art building, it means that it cannot function without climate control systems. The building is just not capable of maintaining good preservation quality climate without installations. And that is very costly. Also, the installations are out of date. They're over 40 years old, so you can imagine that replacing those is hugely costly. And you could also wonder if it is economically feasible to keep a large collection in a top location in the heart of a city center. Many libraries have already made the step before us and have moved collections offsite to external facilities. But actually most important for the decision, I think, is the fact that long-term exploitation at the current site is just not sustainable. As I said, we use active climate control. We have systems that are out of date. They are costing enormous amount of energies to operate, and the cost to replace them is huge as well. And we're talking about millions of euros. I mean, these are significant costs. This is a pie chart that shows the use of our energy in the building of the KB. But if you were to look at a pie chart of any building from the same period, it will look very, very similar. These type of buildings, they consume a lot of energy, and it's about 70% of the energy that is used for climate control. That's not just climate control for the books and the collection, also for humans, but it is an enormous amount of our energy consumption. It goes towards heating, humidification, ventilation, and cooling. In 2018, we did an assessment of our energy use and how that compares to other office buildings and also museums in the Netherlands. And it's quite shocking to see that both our electricity and gas consumption compared to office spaces is, on the high to very high comparison. And compared to museums, we're not doing much better either. So this really isn't a very gentle view of the responsibility that we take as a library in the use of energy resources. We can do better than that. And we are already doing better. We are using wind energy when it comes to electricity. In a carbon footprint calculation, this wind energy is not calculated. So our figures are kind of skewed. In our carbon footprint, we do have a high level of CO2 imprint. But on top of that, we use more energy that comes from from wind energy, and it's not taken into consideration. And you could think, oh, well, that's fantastic that we use so much, over 5,000 tons of comparative wind energy, but it's still energy we use. And if we could reduce our energy consumption, we would use less renewable energy as well. And I think overall in our current day and age, that's something we should strive for. The KB, like many libraries, can find its mission very well represented in the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations. These 4 were selected for our current mission statement and our 4 years plan for the library. We have not really circled renewable energy and climate action, but I think with the plans that we are developing and the building we're working towards, we are definitely picking up on these as well. And we are not at the forefront of this movement. In many places around the world, directors are talking to each other and with each other about the use of energy in heritage institutions. Already in 2008, there was a big meeting of directors of large museums in the world. They got together and they were talking about ways to reduce the dependency on active climate control for collection care. It's quite interesting to see that these big shots have actually called out for this sort of operation before the energy crisis that we're currently in. But I think the writing has been on the wall for a very, very long time that we as a cultural heritage sector, we have to face this and we have to take action and do our bit towards becoming more energy neutral. However, as a heritage institution, you're also responsible for the safekeeping of your collections. So we want to do something to reduce energy, but we do not want our collections to be in any danger of advanced or enhanced degradation because of bad climatic conditions. It just so happens that the two can actually work very well together. You can actually create much more stable climates and reduce your energy consumption by moving towards passive solutions. It may not work in every climate zone in the world, but the climate zone that we're in the Netherlands, in Northwestern Europe, this is very much a possibility and something that we should use. So in our new storage facility, we are aiming for optimal preservation conditions. but with as little dependency on technical climate control systems. We aim at a relative humidity that is stable and within set boundaries, but temperature is allowed to fluctuate with the seasons. This is something that has been proven already in research, that temperature fluctuations, as long as they're gradual, is something that library collections or some other collections, but library collections in specifically can sustain quite well. And we want our new storage building to be energy neutral. So if we do have to use any energy at all, we want to use renewable energy from solar panels. This cartoon is by a famous Dutch cartoonist who already gives an idea. I think this dates back to maybe the 1990s, but he already shows how you can actually use books to climatize your house. This is a couple that is looking at a house for sale, and the house has an energy rating of A, and they say to one another, yeah, you know, with bookshelves on the walls, of course you can insulate your building. And this principle, we are using that principle in our new building. So how does it work? We're not the first ones to try this. There's already an established example in the Speicher library in Switzerland. As far as I know, this is the first building that was built as a passive building for a large collection. Actually, collections from 5 different libraries were moved together into this building. And what makes this concept works is something very specific. It's storing your collection at a very, very high density. So super high density storage. You can only do this really if you use robots to operate the retrieval of the collection. I don't know if you're familiar with what a robotized storage looks like, but you have to imagine huge racks, several meters high, 11 to 15 meters high, and in the racks, metal racks, are containers, usually plastic containers, and your collection, your books, are stacked within those plastic containers, and a robotic crane moves inside corridors to pick the right container for, you know, the book that you want to access. By putting this collection compactly and tightly together, there is not a lot of air around it, and these books bring in an enormous thermal mass inside the building, and that stabilizes your climate. That also stabilizes the relative humidity fluctuations, provided that no moisture can enter through the building itself. So you have to have a completely airtight and leak-tight building. This is just to show you the result that they achieve in Buron in Switzerland. The red lines are the temperature fluctuations inside the storage unit, and you can see it fluctuates with the seasons. So in the winter it's cold, in the summer it gets warmer. And the relative humidity are the blue lines, and that also is pretty stable and hovers around the 45, 50, 55% relative humidity, which is actually pretty good conditions for keeping your collections. So what we are planning to do, and I can't show any design drawings yet because we are still working on those, but we are looking at a super high density storage with thick walls and waterproofed. We are excluding any water carrying systems. If you have an active climate control systems, there is always pipes that through which the water runs that operates dehumidification, humidification parts of your system, and they have a tendency to leak. We live in the Netherlands, so we want to avoid flooding. So we're going to build above sea level and floodplains. We do not, we envisage this to be operated by a robot. There's another advantage of using robots instead of people in a storage facility. And that is when people operates the stacks, you do need to keep some sort of thermal comfort for humans. A robot doesn't feel temperature, so you can actually let the temperature drop considerably lower than is comfortable for people. And that benefits the preservation of the books. The lower the temperature, the longer the books will last, especially for paper and acidic paper. This is a very efficient way of prolonging the lifetime. But we are putting all our eggs in one basket, you would say. Your entire collection in one big space, tightly packed together, that's a huge fire risk. That's true. And we do need a system to prevent fire from happening, and that's a low oxygen system. So there is going to be one system in the building that influences the conditions inside the store, and that's a system that basically blows in dry nitrogen and then reduces the oxygen levels inside the building. Overall, all these things combined result in improved preservation quality. You can do some calculations, and we're estimating that the longevity of the collection is going to be improved by maybe 50–60%. And you get that for not using much energy at all. But I'm head of collection care, and I'm responsible for this collection, so I do have some questions. And those questions are more about understanding the process of moving the collection from the current building to the new building, but also what will things like climate change do in the long run. Temperature will change over the next 20, 30, maybe even 100 years. What is the impact on the indoor climate? So with these questions, I went to a group of building physicists and scientists and said, can we simulate our new climate? Can we build a simulation model that shows what this climate might do in now and in the future? And that's possible if you get the right people. So with this group of people, we embarked on building a climate simulation model. And we had several questions that we wanted to look at and see if a simulation could answer those. First of all, what is the best construction of the building? This is a very important question, because how do you achieve that thermal mass and the air tightness? What materials can you use? What basically gives you the best protection possible? And also, what is the impact of the color of the building? You can imagine a dark building gets warmer and retains heat a lot more than a light building. We wanted to know how the airflow would work in a building like that. If it is 11–15 meters high with very narrow corridors, don't you get stagnant air? Do you get stratification? Higher temperatures at the top and lower temperatures at the bottom, and what does that do to the relative humidity? How does that look like, and what can you do to mitigate that? What is the impact of local climate, and especially of climate change? That's an interesting question. And what is the effect of the low oxygen system? Because we know that the air you have to blow in to achieve this is very dry, is below 10% relative humidity. So what does that do to your collection? Does it reduces the relative humidity to a level that's too low? And what is the effect of the collection itself on that indoor climate? If you put 10 books in that new space, you will not notice a difference. But if you put 3/4 of your collection in that building and it's almost full, that has an impact on stabilizing that the conditions inside. So when is that point achieved? So initially, when you move your collection, maybe the first half year or a year, you have to be very aware that things can go up and down quite a lot. But there comes a point when basically there is enough books in that new building that it will kind of regulate itself. So that's also an interesting one. And maybe there is a best time of year to start moving collections. Maybe that has an impact too. So this simulation study generated plenty of graphs. I'm not going to show you, I'm only going to show you one, and later on I'm going to give you an overall result. But this, for example, is an indication of the climate over a period of 20 years, or 15 years, sorry, 15 years. And it says 2006 to 2021. The reason it says that is because the data of the outside climate conditions for those years were used. And you can see here the temperature in the building. The different lines are the different levels in the building and different parts of the building. You can see that it sort of hovers between 10 at the minimum and maybe maximum of 18, 20 degrees at the top. So that's a sort of seasonal difference that we're expecting. And this is the relative humidity that hovers anywhere between the 40 and the 50%. So it's kind of on the dry side, but for preservation of books, that's actually pretty good. So this is something that I would be very content with. But we looked at all kinds of variants. So what would happen if you did this, or what would happen if you did that? And these are some of the variants that we changed just to see what the impact was. There were two that came out with huge impact. So these are two are ones that we're focusing on. The low oxygen system has a huge impact, but it's actually a positive impact. If there wasn't a low oxygen system in there and you weren't blowing in that drier air, in the situation where in the Netherlands, where it's a very damp climate, the relative humidity inside the store would go up. And actually, this is kind of a dehumidification system in disguise. So actually, it works really well. So not only reduces it, or it basically avoids the risk of fire, it also has a slight dehumidification impact. Another one that had a huge impact is the fact that the robots are using electricity and generating heat. That is something that was surprising, that the impact of the robots was this big. And the great thing about simulating is that you know it in advance, and you can say, hey, market, we need robots that generate less energy. So with this notion, we are now developing and designing a store in which we use fewer robots, and the robots they do not stay inside that main compartment at night. They sort of roll out, and so their heat is taken away from that space to an adjacent area. This is all very useful because otherwise we would not have known this. And yeah, it just shows that you can learn a lot from these sort of simulations. And this is not all. We also want to look at the books themselves. What do these books experience when they go through the changes in seasons, especially the temperature changes? And for this, we work together with the State Heritage Agency in the Netherlands. They have a special lab that's climate controlled, and you can do all sorts of simulations in. And we simulated with books that are not part of the collection, but you can find books in secondhand stores that you can work with. These books were given different sensors at different places. They were stacked in different ways, standing up and laying down. And these containers are going through cycles of climatic changes, and several things are recorded. What is the difference in temperature and relative humidity inside a book? What is the weight difference? Because weight tells you something about how much moisture a book has absorbed. A lighter book has released moisture, and when a book becomes heavier, it absorbs moisture. So that gives you an indication of how quickly a book might respond to these kind of changes when it's packed like this in a container. This research is still ongoing. Books packed like this tend to respond very, very, very slowly. So every test that we do takes at least several weeks to months. But hopefully by the end of the year, we're going to get some interesting results from this as well. And that might help us decide, especially with special collections, how it is we want to stack them inside a container, what the best way of packing is to provide the best protection for the collection. I promised you one more graph. This is the last one. For those of you not familiar with reading these kind of graphs, these curves are the relative humidity curves. This is the weight, the weight of moisture per kilogram, and this is temperature. This blue box is kind of the bracket in which we would be happy if the climate would fall within that bracket. And what we see is that in almost all seasons, they're indicated by different colors, it falls within that bracket. There is a slight deviation to a slightly drier condition below 45%. It's not something that we're extremely concerned about. That's still very acceptable. I get very happy when I look at this, and I hope that in reality, once it's built and we're going to monitor all the climatic conditions, we're actually going to say, look, you know, that the simulation was true and it worked. That's it. I'm going to stop sharing.
Thank you very much for this very fascinating presentation, rich in detail, but also it's heartening to see how much care you're putting into taking these decisions and testing things before any decisions are taken. So I think that's a very impressive body of work. Are you happy to take some questions?
Sure. Yeah, fire away.
Good. Because I was wondering, so in the old library, as it were, many libraries in Europe that I know have separate zones for separate types of materials. So for, you know, early printed books, is a different zone in terms of climate control compared to modern material or photographs or whatever. Now you won't have that in a new building, will you? So what is the expected impact of that?
No, we won't have that. We will have that to a certain extent because we're going to build very high. There is stratification, and there will some temperature and relative humidity deviations towards the edges of the building. So we have said that our special collections has to be in the heart of this building and sort of surrounded by other collections. So that's one adjustment that we've made. But in general, I don't know, I hope I'm not disappointing people, but I think it's really, really difficult to maintain very specific climates for very specific collections. It's a notion that kind of grew after the Second World War, and especially in the 80s when system seems to be able to do everything. But we now know, looking back, that that's almost impossible. If you were to measure temperature and relative humidity in those different places right at where the collection is, you'll notice that that's not really, the result is really not that precise as you were hoping for. Also, whatever you measure, you have to understand that the measurement devices have fault margins. For example, relative humidity. When you measure relative humidity, you have to sort of, you have to understand that there is a plus or minus 2% in fault margin. So even if you think you might be creating 43% for this collection and 45% for that collection and maybe 50% for that collection, in fact, in reality, they're probably all very much similar. Yeah. So it's a nice idea, and in a laboratory environment, it might work. But overall, the biggest benefit you're going to get is if you can reduce your temperature. I think every 5 degrees drop in temperature slows reactions down by half, and the degradation process is a chemical reaction. And if you slow that down, you are going to have huge impact on your collection. So yeah, it's we're going to be happy with one entire container for our collections. We know there is going to be a climate variation within. We're trying to use that as best as possible, but we accept that that's the situation that it is. But the overall netto result is going to be a lot better than what we have now.
Mm-hmm. So you did some calculations for the carbon footprint of the old building. I was wondering, have you already managed to do that for the new building, and what is the impact of your wishful thinking?
And that's a very good question, because I have a confession to make. Because this new building, we are looking at building it from concrete. From all our simulation studies, a concrete building is still the building that provides the best stability for the longest run. It lasts the longest. It's the least. It takes the least amount of maintenance. So we are going to build with concrete. We know that that's huge carbon footprint. I would like to do that calculation for sure, because I think we shouldn't shy away from it. And it would also be interesting to see how that initial huge impact tapers out if you look at it as a building that will last for 100 years. And if you then see the end result, I'm sure it will still justify the fact that we're doing this. But no, we haven't done that yet. No.
Oh, but that's a great answer, I think. Thank you. So slightly more perhaps, well, it was triggered by what you said about the Swiss situation, where they've built one building for 5 institutions. And the Netherlands is a fairly small country, and there's quite a few institutions that have storage wishes. Mm-hmm. And I was wondering what the Dutch national approach was to collaboration in this respect.
That is a very good question, and it's something that I can't really answer in any detail, because that sort of research was done before I arrived at the library. My job started in 2018, and my predecessor did actually go around asking if other libraries were interested in joining. At the time, there wasn't really the interest, so it didn't happen. But it's a very, very valid question. I think once you've got the train on the road, it's really, really difficult to say, okay, let's do this again, because maybe in the current energy crisis, there might be more people that say, hey, can we join too?
Yeah.
But no, we do have an option of extending our building. So we're going to build a building that is has the size that fits our current collection, plus a growth to maybe 2040, something like that. And we have an extra plot of land next to it, so we can expand it. Maybe, who knows, maybe that's something that will be utilized once the building is there and everybody sees it's working.
Yeah.
Maybe sometimes people need to be convinced as well before, joining the queue.
Well, I'm much heartened by the fact that you are putting in so much research. I know for a fact that the Royal Library, the National Library of the Netherlands, also needs to move its staff at some point to a new building environment. If we are treated with a similar amount of care, then
yeah, that would be good. Do a simulation of people. Yeah, no, I will take that home. Yeah.
Well, particularly in this day of Corona, where I think maybe our working practices have changed a lot. So any modeling or plans that we made for the use of various areas might have changed a bit in the last 2 years.
Oh yeah, yeah.
But that is for another day, I think. So with this end of the presentation, I would like to thank you very much for doing this presentation, for taking the time to work with us to record it. And
thank you for inviting me.
Look forward to your next presentation about storing humans.
And there's still lots to tell about the development of this store. So once we have more news and things are really starting to show, and I can actually show images, I'm happy to come back and tell some more.
Wonderful. We look forward to that. Thank you, Foekje.
Okay, thank you.